What is up, everybody? Welcome back to Rough Drafts. My name is Sam Pratt, and it's not just me on the line today. I also have former pro player, former Canadian national champion of Limited Level Up's set review fame, Marc Anderson. Marc, how's it going?
I'm doing great, Sam. Thanks for having me. This is a perfect example of trickle-down economics working at its finest, because you were recently a guest on, Lords of Limited, and now you're having me as a guest, and we're all shouting each other out. So this is fantastic. Happy to be here.
We're all just guessing on each other's stuff, and it's great. It's all building up our resumes together. It's great. So this is going to be a little bit of a departure of my usual content. Taking a little bit of opportunity during the downtime during Spider-Man. So this isn't really going to be going in depth on strategic advice or in any particular format. I just wanted to kind of have a conversation with Marc about, Limited in general. Marc's been playing Magic a long time and has had a lot of success, and I think it would be great to pick your brain about what you think about Limited, how Limited has changed over the years. So I guess just to get started, do you want to walk through kind of like your Magic history?
Are you sure, first of all?
I think we're prepared. I think people want the longer episodes,
Yeah, I mean, we were talking beforehand, and I was joking that the answer to your first question could be anywhere between 3 minutes and 3 hours, because in terms of history, my relationship with Magic goes back quite far. I'll try to just keep in the important bits, but my apologies to anyone listening who feels that I maybe should have shouted them out and skipped by them. Not meant as a personal slight whatsoever. So I actually started playing Magic in 2001. I actually met my longtime, to this day, best friend in grade 9 in high school. And we hit it off immediately. And then he taught me how to play Magic, and I taught him how to play Warhammer. So I actually got the much better deal out of that exchange, looking back all these years. But it was kind of funny because he explained the rules to me. I already liked, strategy games and puzzles and that kind of thing. And then him and his brother put on a demonstration of what a game was. And they just had, kitchen table decks. Like, this is very casual back in the day. And so the matchup that I got to witness as my first game of Magic that I ever saw was Reanimator, like turn 1 Entomb, Spirit of the Night, turn 2 Exhume, versus mono red land destruction.
So they were like pretty invested at that point.
Yeah, but like you can imagine that there was like a 1 minute game. Like the Reanimator deck is killed you by turn 3 while the other guy's looking at Stone Rain and Demolish in his hand. So, despite a rocky start, I fell in love with the game and kind of started visiting my local game store. So made some friends there. Started going out with them, and we introduced me to Booster Draft and Cube and things like that. After that for a while, I then moved into, tournament scenes. And basically throughout my Magic, whatever career, lifestyle, whatever you call it, I've always just been looking to make connections, meet new people, kind of expand my network and learn what I can from people. So as I kept kind of going on to bigger and bigger stages, it moved up to the point where I got invited to the local ringers draft. So there was a bunch of people, some fantastic players, and not only were these some of the top players in Toronto or Ontario, these were actually some of the best players worldwide. So people who've been playing long enough might recognize the name like Rich Hohen. Many consider him to be the best limited player of all time. He was an example of one of the regulars at these drafts. And so really cut my teeth playing against some of the best players, and just with the attitude that I wanted to learn as much as I can at all times. And then you end up picking up a thing or two. Like, that's just kind of how the game works, right? So throughout that, I ended up then going to a GP. I cashed a GP on the limited side, and that brought my DCI rating up to a respectable rate. Now, Sam, do you know what a DCI rating is?
I had a DCI card. I know what DCI rating is.
Okay. I wasn't sure where the cutoff was for that.
I have a DCI contact in my phone. Yeah.
Do you have your number memorized?
No, God, no.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, DCI used to be like a way to kind of measure your rating, kind of like, you have your arena ranking right now. Imagine if that was turned into just like a public number. And so your rating used to qualify you for tournaments, and that qualified me for my first Canadian Nationals tournament. And again, very sad They don't run these tournaments anymore. This is a long time ago. We're talking about 2010 now. So 2010, I'd been playing for 9 years at this point. You don't get good that fast. It took, many, many, many attempts. But in my first nationals tournament, I actually lost 2 consecutive win-ins for top 8, and was kind of heartbroken and went away, thinking, oh, that was my one shot. But then my rating was still good enough to requalify me for the next year. So the next year was actually in my hometown in Toronto. I ended up, as you alluded to, I'm the Canadian national champion. I ended up winning that tournament, thanks in no small part to a 6-0 limited performance, which is fantastic. It was a split format event. So that was already way beyond my wildest dreams. Like, I definitely don't claim to ever be the best player in Canada whatsoever. But that then, as the top 4 in my nation's nationals tournament, that qualified me for the old format of Worlds. And so Worlds used to be a huge pro tour, and it was like a regular pro tour, but added in all of the top performers from each nation's nationals championship. So it was like an extra 100 players on top of your normal pro tour pool. And in that tournament, I ended up missing top 8 on tie breaks. So I wasn't 9th, I was like 12th or something like that. There was a bunch of us who were all tied for the 8th and 9th spot. But that ended up qualifying me for a whole bunch of tournaments after that. And kind of the rest is mostly history. So this was my big breakthrough, way beyond expectations. I got to play in 6 pro tours. Unfortunately, didn't have any other notable results after that. My life kind of took over. I actually used my winnings from Worlds to pay for my wife's engagement ring.
There you go. Yeah.
Was very smart, because she can never complain about me playing Magic ever again now. But with that, being engaged, planning the wedding, moving on among my career, things got really busy, and I ended up kind of putting on the Magic on the back burner after I fell off the Pro Tour train in about 2013. And then the rest kind of is mostly present day of the stuff that I think you mostly know about from that point on.
Yeah, because I know you came back around the early 2020s playing a lot of Limited, and you were obviously like jumped on Alex's stuff with Limited Level Up, set reviews, and you're pretty active in his Discord too. So
yeah, that was actually just another example of networking. So I took a big break, and then I actually purposely didn't download Arena because I knew it would suck me back in. So I wasn't playing Magic Online, I wasn't playing Arena. But then COVID hit and there was nothing to do.
Right.
So I downloaded Arena, and I used to love Booster Draft. I hadn't done a Booster Draft in years. The set at the time was Kaldheim, which was fantastic. It hooked me in. I went in 100%. And then eventually I started watching streams, found out that Alex was in Toronto, connected with him, and kind of reached out and booked a coaching session with him as a way to discuss things with him. We really hit it off. He ended up not charging me for the coaching session because I provided a lot of useful information to him about his tier list and stuff like that. So the secret's out now. You can get free coaching, just in very, very rare circumstances. But yeah, we really hit it off. And then he ended up coming out to some of my paper drafts and then inviting me to do the set review when Ethan ended up having his child and couldn't do them anymore.
So have you always considered yourself like Limited first? Back when you were on the Pro Tour and playing like these tournaments, what was Limited always like your favorite format way back then? Because I know that those tournaments have a lot of constructed, like it's mostly constructed for all of them.
Yeah, I've always been a Limited first guy, like Booster Draft in my opinion, and the extension Team Draft being maybe the best way to do that has always been my favorite way to play. That being said, as a mostly Limited only player, when I was kind of forced to learn Constructed, like if you play Constructed kind of casually, for me, it's not that interesting. But if you really dive into the deep end and get to the point where like each card's specific role in its deck and how it lines up against everything, I understand the appeal for sure. And I enjoyed playing Constructed. But I've always been like, when we were doing Pro Tour testing, I was always like, oh, let's, we got 8 people here. Let's do a booster draft. Like, why do we need to test more matchups? We've done that already.
I definitely feel that. Like I've dabbled in Constructed before, and I always have the most fun as well when I'm like really deep in the format. But like that takes so much of a commitment, and like I'd rather be playing limited for for that amount of time. So I definitely understand that. What is it about limited for you? Like, do you have like any thoughts about why you gravitate towards limited as a favorite format?
Part of it is just it's Magic to me is the ultimate puzzle game, right? Like you can think about it for hours, days, months. I mean, you can always be thinking about something, but limited lets you add so many more layers to that because you start off knowing nothing, right? Like when you sit down for a draft,
Right.
anything could happen. You got to be ready, you got to be on your toes, you got to be prepared. And then there's so many different styles that end up coming through in terms of preference. I mean, just watching some of the streamers and pros that we see have certain tendencies that they like to draft. You can see that people really do have their own unique take on formats. So you end up building your first puzzle when you're doing the draft, and then you get your second puzzle when you're doing deck building, and then you get into kind of the gameplay and potential sideboarding, and it just adds so many more extra layers. Whereas constructed is that kind of boils down to much more micro decisions where it's like, oh, I'm going to change this one card and that's going to really change what's happening. And it's a much more kind of refined, minute scale version of things. And I prefer the open paint canvas, being able to do whatever you want and kind of jumping in and being able to do this with everybody. Like I can just travel across the world right now, go into a local game store and sit down and do a booster draft. I don't need to bring all of my
Yeah.
stuff with me, right?
Right. And I can see like those preferences of yours come out kind of in the set review where you really try to take like holistic looks at the format really early. Like I remember you picking up on this is like ultra specific, but I remember you picking up on Ifara's dispersal in March of the Machine very early, about how that would line up so well into like the counter stuff and the battles in that format. So that definitely checks out like overall.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic because I think that one of my best skills is quickly figuring out what a format is about. Like what's important, how are the games going to play out, how is this going to kind of what are going to be the important turns, what are going to be the important decisions. And so very quickly after you think that kind of skill would help me on something like a pro tour where you're going in usually about 2 or 3 weeks into a new set where a lot of people haven't figured things out, you'd imagine that would be kind of my forte and where I'd be able to leverage those skills to greater success. But ironically, like all of my best performances in limited, whether it was either of my nationals performances, whether it was the world's draft, whether it was whatever it is that I've done well on a limited scale, it's usually been later into a format. So maybe I'm bad at evaluating my skills, who knows? But there's an interesting kind of dichotomy there where I think that I'm really good at figuring things out quickly. I do have like a lot of people reaching out to me for my ideas early on, including on the set review, but then I ended up kind of doing better the later into a format it gets.
Yeah, that's interesting. So speaking of preparing for big tournaments, I know that you have talked about how you host weekly drafts, in Toronto. And I know that part of that involves helping some Canadian pros test for the Pro Tour. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, again, kind of diving into some anecdotes and personal history there. So again, when we kind of came out of COVID, I had some friends who were interested in hosting paper events again. And so one of my friends actually started hosting weekly like bar drafts. So everyone would go out to a bar and we'd do either like a chaos draft or a booster draft or some kind of weird cube or anti-league, like all kinds of weird kind of casual formats that people, whatever was the flavor of the day. And so those ran for a little while, but he kind of stopped hosting those a little bit. And as much as I enjoyed them, the whole idea of going to a bar where you got like sticky tables and poor lighting
Yeah.
and like things get worse as the sun goes down and you have people kind of bumping into you and asking you like, oh, those magic cards, I used to play those kinds of things. There's an allure to there, but I much prefer things to be a little bit more on the competitive serious side of things. So I actually eventually started moving that group, some of those players over to my parents' place in the outskirts of Toronto. And then that kind of developed to getting a bit of a reputation as more and more strong players started showing up. And so, of course, I was always looking to, again, build my network, meet more people, kind of grow the limited community. And it's since turned into a hub where anytime there's a pro tour coming up, we're very lucky now that Canadians have lots of representation on the pro tour. We usually have a good number of Canadians qualified, and a lot of those end up being from the Greater Toronto area. So I usually have anywhere between like 4 and 12 to 15-ish has kind of been the range for actual pro tour qualified players showing up at my parents' place to draft. And then we often do like a post-draft discussion about the format and like a kind of visual tier list of the commons, and just because again, the players have very little time. They often have like 1 week in Toronto before they fly out to wherever they're testing with their team. They're trying to get as much information as they can. And it's gotten to the point where people actually reach out to me being like, hey, Mark, I'm qualified for the next Pro Tour. We've never met before, but I heard you host like a draft. Could I come out to the next one?
That's really cool. And 12 to 15 is like a decent handful. So when you are helping these players like learn the limited format, I imagine that a lot of it is informed by your own experience playing the set, usually online. And I know that there's a lot of talk also about how sort of the Pro Tour draft is like kind of a completely different metagame than you would experience, you know, playing on the arena ladder. And I was wondering if you could like expand on that, because I think you're one of the few people in the world that has like decent experience in both realms.
Well, it's already like the obvious part wasn't so much with me hosting the drafts. The obvious part was actually when I started playing a lot more arena, because I had already done, you know, the high level stuff before I started playing arena. And then arena, initially when I first started playing during Cal time, I mean, I started off in bronze, and I was doing like 1 or 2 drafts a week and never making it to mythic.
Sure.
And it was like, oh, I'm having so much fun. I'm winning like 80% of my matches. Like, you know,
I'm great. I still got it.
yeah. So I mean, I knew that there was the ranking system, and then, you know, mythic was harder, but I didn't really grasp it. And then it was actually the set after Cal time. It was Strixhaven, where I started playing a lot, and I hit like, you know, number 2 mythic or whatever. So playing enough to actually get up pretty high on the ladder, and just noticing that the decks that I thought were good were just always coming up against decks that were like 10 out of 10s. So
Right.
when you start to identify that you are not winning with a deck that you think should be able to win, you kind of got to question, well, what's happening? What's going wrong? What is it about my draft that's not functioning here? And then again, just this is also the time when I started watching more streamers, and just when you're in streams, you hear the community talking about these types of things, and you're with people who are playing, you know, multiple arena drafts a day type of thing, and really heavily invested in the format. And so I think that what it really comes down to is that the arena pool of players is so large and diverse, and they haven't currently got a system where they're seeding pods, right? Like you're drafting with
Right.
anybody. So just the sheer number of players that are in a draft means that you'll often be in a pod with some players who are maybe doing their first draft, or maybe that, you know, they've been a long time commander player, but they're not much of a limited player. And so you end up getting past cards that you shouldn't, because people are taking flashy rares or expensive cards, or cards that they saw be good in a commander game or whatever. And so you end up getting the top percentage of a color's depth. So instead of seeing, like a great example would be white in Edge of Eternities, right? We just came out of Edge of Eternities, and I think white performed really well in arena. Some of the top player stats had it as, you know, the best color for a period of time, but that's because its top few commons were really good. As you go down the list, the depth of commons for white wasn't necessarily that impressive. But on arena, it didn't matter, because you knew, okay, I'm going to take a focus fire over this 7 mana rare that doesn't do anything and end up with more of them in my deck. So you really do end up just with the top tier of cards in the mythic ranks, and you know, platinum as well. I'm not just saying it's only mythic players. As you go down, it kind of continues depending where you are in the month. So when you're then stepping into a pro tour, you need to realize, and this is why a lot of players move to places like Magic Online, because you need to realize that you're not going to see Cryogen Relic, 8th pick or whatever.
Right. I remember like this weekend we were like in Chord's Discord talking about like one of the drafts, and you mentioned that someone was clowning on the Starbreach Whale pick, and you mentioned that you had that in your deck 2 or 3 times in the testing ones. So it's interesting. Is there like a certain class of cards maybe that gets better in these types of drafts, or are there like different priorities that you feel like players shift when they move to these more high stakes, like high skill level drafts?
Yeah, well, that kind of brings into the other point, because it's not just the quality of drafters who are surround you. There's also the best of one hand smoother, right?
Right.
So that being on just means that not only do you have a really slick deck, but you're going to see the best version of that deck more often than not when you're playing on a ladder format on a best of one in Arena. So when you move to the Pro Tour, you don't need to be as worried about your opponent starting with the best 2-3-4 curve possible and hitting both of their colors immediately and never having to mulligan. So it just gives you a little bit more time. And with more time, cards like that are either smoothing or ways of spending mana or just ways of taking advantage in a longer game will just be bumped up just a little bit. And so, yeah, the Starbreach Whale that I was defending as a card that's, I'm not saying it's amazing in the PT drafts, but it's a card that I'm not unhappy with. And that we saw them in the day one feature pod. That's the type of card where warping it on turn 2 at a Pro Tour is not necessarily what you want to be doing on turn 2, but it's also not going to feel like, oh, I lost the game because I didn't affect the board on the second turn.
Right. And I know you also play a mixture of best of one and best of three, like myself as well. And I assume that also holds true just without the hand smoother between those two formats as well.
I play very little best of three.
Oh, okay.
I do it occasionally just because sometimes there are some formats where I get more sick of the hand smoothing curve outs than others, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I just kind of want to break, and I want to just not play against the best versions of things. So there will be some formats where I'll do a lot of best of three. And you might have seen me post about it recently because I assumed with the pick 2 draft that it was going to be weird enough that like best of 3 might be the more normal way of playing Magic. But yeah, I did two best of 3 drafts for the Spider-Man set, and then that was my extent of best of 3 for this one.
Okay. I probably just saw him because you trophied in both.
Yeah, I do. I do this. I mean, probably could stop at this point. Initially, when I first downloaded Twitter and then later B-Sky, I decided, well, no one knows who I am. I'm just gonna like start posting my trophy decks and then comments about like what worked well in them, and then that'll be my content. And like I have posted zero personal information in there. Like no one knows anything about my actual, political thoughts or anything. What's going on at WotC. I keep pretty tight-lipped. But you can see a heck of a lot of trophy lists posted on there. So if you want to see trophy lists, follow me on Twitter or B-Sky. Yeah.
And I just remember that's not the only sort of content that you make. And this is not, you explicitly say this isn't content, but you also host the streamer calls ahead of the Arena Opens. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So for those who aren't aware, again, this is going to sound like a broken record at this point, but this is me just like networking and thinking, hey, this is interesting. I'm going to pitch it to people. And it's kind of like, asking out a girl on a date. The only way you get a date is if you just gather up the courage and give it a try and see what happens. So I leveraged Cord, Alex, who I'd been doing set reviews with, as my in to like reach out to a bunch of streamers who I knew were like really strong players. So I was specifically looking for players who were doing like top performers, because I don't want to get into the politics of who got invited and who didn't, but just at the time of when I first started doing these, I just looked at like people's win rate and what I knew to them and what I heard about them, and reached out to I made a bunch of lists, like my A tier list, my B tier list, my C tier list. Who was I going to reach out to? Thankfully, almost everybody in my initial batch that I was looking for was interested in just the idea of, before the Arena Opens, which were being held every month at that time for every limited event. So every time there was an arena open for a new limited format, I would host a call with a bunch of limited streamers. We would talk about sharing our experiences and kind of similar to a way that people would run PT style meetings, because I kind of missed that high level, in-depth limited discussion points. And a lot of these streamers don't have time to engage with other people's content because they're so busy producing their own. And anytime they have free time, they're either doing, video editing or actually streaming or coaching or whatever, as I'm sure you can start to attest to at this point as well.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I can't recommend those enough. Marc just uploads them as just a video on a Google Drive, and I check them out as soon as I can whenever he hosts them, and they're really cool content. Like, you get to hear not only what people are doing different from each other, but like sort of the reactions between these streamers, etc. Like what they think of each deck, and the discussions that come out of it are really interesting. So I would definitely recommend checking that out if you haven't.
And one thing that I've tried to do for that is reach out to people who were doing things differently than I was. Because I do feel like it's kind of funny that I do the set reviews with Alex Nikolic with Corticals, because out of anybody I've ever met in the entire Magic community, he's the one who thinks most similarly to how I do. So you think that we wouldn't be a good, partnership? Like there's not a lot of yin and yang there going on. But for the streamers, like I reached out to players like, DeFore on one side of things, Sam Black, Jason Yee, Carl, was in the initial batch 2 Duct Cube drafting these, 42 card pile of nonsense things. And so it really does give you more of a range of what's possible within a format, rather than me just compare to a bunch of other Marc Andersons being like, well, what did you draft? Oh, I did the same thing you did. Like, you're not going to learn as much if you do things that way.
Right. So I wanted to ask your thoughts on, since you have been playing Magic for a long time and you've also been drafting for a long time, I wanted to ask your thoughts about how like limited has changed over the years, because I personally, I've been playing Magic for 20 years, but I was not drafting for the first, 12, 13 of those. And so I missed like when you were playing all these tournaments around like 2010, 2011, I wasn't playing limited. And I'm sure a lot of the people that listen to my podcast also weren't. And I'm really curious, like your thoughts on how limited has changed in general.
I am going to do my best to answer that. But one thing I will make clear is that even when I was playing on the Pro Tour, I actually probably wasn't as engaged with a format, like nearly as much as I am now, just because, again, like with me purposely staying away from Magic Online and Magic Arena, only doing stuff in person for years and years and years, I actually wasn't doing that many drafts of a given format. And you top that off with the fact that one of the biggest differences, if you would ask me now, is the fact that all this data exists.
Right.
So even when you're doing the draft 2 months into a format of an old format, you may know something that everyone who's at the drafting table doesn't know, because you have a particular pet card that works really well, that if there was data back then would have been like a overperformer and everyone would have figured it out.
And just the fact that you were so into limited and playing Magic in that way, but like not jamming drafts 24/7 online, I think is a difference between limited back then and now as well.
Yeah, I did. So I've always been a big proponent for engaging with content. So I would read a lot of articles back in the day. There didn't used to be people streaming. There used to be, there was way back in the day, there was Brainburst produced a lot of articles, which is really dialing it back. But like I grew up on reading like Mike Flores and Zvi Mashowitz and, Pat Chapin and like all these fantastic writers about their thoughts on not necessarily just a format, but just how they think about Magic. I know you've referenced a lot of some of the older articles that are really gold mines now. Even today, I think people could learn so much engaging with some of the theory stuff that was presented back then. And it also gave you a lot of time to digest that information, because you would be still, like, I've always thought a lot about Magic. I could be on the bus, I could be waiting at the airport, I could be, strolling for a walk or whatever. And I'll often be thinking about what it was that I read on a Magic article. But to be able to put that into practice, you really had time to, okay, what was this writer trying to convey and how can I do that in my next event? And then it made you like more excited about it. So it really was, you wouldn't get, even though we only had 3.5 formats a year back in the day, which is literally half of what we're going to get next year. For us, like, let's take a second to appreciate we got 7 sets next year. But you wouldn't get bored because you were looking forward to trying new things or a new card or like making that D plus level card shine because you hadn't seen it do that thing before. So it was just really a lot slower progression of a format. And even though I loved a lot of old formats and some of them I had a fantastic time with, I'm definitely of the opinion that if I went back and engaged with those now to the same degree that I do today, that they probably wouldn't hold up quite as well just because of the way they've really upped their game in the production of limited sets.
So you do tend to think that limited has kind of improved design-wise in whatever way in the last like 5 years or so, 10 years or so compared to, 15 years ago?
Part of it is just to do with the complexity of the cards. Like if you add another line of text on any card, it's going to now interact in a different way with a bunch more cards than it would have if it didn't have those extra words.
Right.
Because I said we used to get 3.5 sets a year. One of those was just whatever the core set was. And you'd get a vanilla, often multiple vanilla 1/1s for 1, 2/2s for 2, maybe a 3/3 for 3, but usually like a 3/2 or a 2/3 for 3. I mean, like, don't push your luck here. And then, so you just, there's not a lot of interesting things you can do when your pack that you open up just has a bunch of vanilla creatures in it. So not only have they made the complexity higher, but they've also been really good about creating archetypes that don't just have a single identity. Because if you go back, I know we're actually going to be returning to the Plane of Lorwyn soon, a much beloved set at the time. I actually didn't like drafting Lorwyn when it first came out because once you, kind of similar to your complaints about Spider-Man, once you took the first couple of picks in your draft, you were often on rails for the remainder of the draft.
Right.
Okay, I'm drafting, fairies. And so now every card that's a fairy, I'm going to put in my pile and hopefully I have a good curve and maybe I'll play a couple of bombs that I can splash. But it's very much like...
was the same thing too, yeah. As another recent example, to some degree.
Yeah, but again, because of the complexity, like Bloomborough was actually really strongly disliked by a lot of entrenched limited players. Mm-hmm. The other thing that's made it interesting, I value a lot the gameplay portion of a format, which can be subjective. Maybe this is extreme bias talking, but in theory, the better a gameplay portion is of a set, the more a good player should be able to win, right? Like,
yeah.
If I can always outplay my opponent, like surely the format's great because I have that much play to it. So that's definitely a little tongue in cheek because obviously I'm not one of the best players in the world. I mean, put that up for debate, but I wouldn't put myself in the top tier. But you really do need to have relevant decisions on multiple turns of a game that are going to impact the outcome, right? Like if you don't have relevant decisions, then you don't end up getting to actually affect the outcome of the game. So things like, in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, one of my favorite sets of all time.
I was going to ask like which specific sets had good like gameplay like this. So we'll go to that one because I think one of the genius things that they did was reconfigure. Because reconfigure, you play an equipment, you're impacting the board, so you're not falling behind, and it gives you ways to spend small amounts of mana to do things that you have to weigh against curving out. So you can, almost all the re-equip things were like 1 to 3 mana, where you could either move it to something else, you could make it back into a creature, you could shift it over, you could put 3 things on one creature to give yourself one kind of good attack. So every turn you have these reconfigure decisions, you have these ninjutsu decisions, you have this tension with, blocking ninjas, you have the tension of how much do I want to splash because there was so many ways to add a 3rd, 4th, or 5th color to either your green deck or your Esper deck or whatever. So just building that type of replayability into it with also
not having a ton of just game ending bombs
Yeah.
is one of the reasons why I love Neon Dynasty so much. Because I talk about this a lot in set reviews. I really like the rares to fall into like the A minus to B plus letter grading scale, where they can end up being strong. They can end up being a reason to play a color that's underdrafted. They, you don't want them to be like, I don't want to think about these, but you don't want them to be an A plus where you just cast it and the game's over and all your
Yeah.
decisions have become irrelevant.
Right.
So they've done so many sets like that now where they make sure you have additional ways to spend mana through, I mean, flashback, kicker, whatever, drawing cards, cycling, looting, conniving, blood tokens, clue tokens, lander tokens. There's just so many ways now where you can decide, okay, I might not have a 2, 3, 4, 5 curve in my hand, but even if I do, maybe it's not going to be correct for me to just play my 2 drop, then my 3 drop, then my 4 drop, then my 5 drop, because on turn 4 I might want to spend 2 increments of 2 mana. So
Right. Yeah.
this is kind of breaking it down probably more than needs to be done, but I just think they've done a really good job of making sure that players have relevant decisions, and the gameplay is really what keeps me coming back to a format for the 40th, 50th draft type of thing.
Sure. Yeah. That's really interesting. All right. I know you also mentioned that you had a couple of comments about Cube. What did you want to say about Cube?
Yeah. So during my, I guess, like break, so when I fell off the Pro Tour from like 2013 to when I came back in 2020, all I was doing during that period in terms of engaging with Magic was cubing. And I've maintained my own cube for longer than that. It's been, I don't even know, multiple decades. I think it was around Lorwyn when I actually made my first cube. And I found it really interesting because I heard your bonus episode podcast, which if anyone hasn't listened to it, highly recommend it.
Thank you.
I should have started with this earlier. We're God knows how long into this episode at this point. But I really will, plug Sam's podcast. If anyone who's been here long enough at this point is probably in for the long haul anyways. But I really do have yours as one of my favorite pieces of content. You really actually deliver what feels like something personalized for me. Like instead of being for just the mass limited player, you're really aiming for those sickos. And I really appreciate it.
I appreciate that too, because I feel like I'm making the content for me a lot of the time, and I am a limited sicko, so it's been really nice to hear other people think that too.
Yeah, it felt the timing was really good too, because the other closest equivalent we had to this was probably Sam Black's Drafting Archetypes podcast, and we had like a week or two where you overlapped and everyone was in heaven, and then unfortunately he's moved over to Commander. But yeah, your piece on Cube I found really interesting because a lot of the decisions that you came to, and I got to be careful how I phrase this because it's going to sound like bragging or gloating if I say it the way I was, are decisions that I had also come to earlier and then took a little bit farther. Okay. So I kind of wanted to run this by you because you were talking a lot about capping power bands within your cards.
Yeah.
And not just having these like broken slam dunk first picks. And that's something that I've been doing where now when I do additions to the cube, they're not always just cutting whatever the last pick cards are or whatever the worst performing cards are. I'll often have a round where I shave the top performers. And there's a class of card that I don't even include in my cube considerations when I'm reviewing a new set anymore. So I'm kind of teasing it without talking about what it is. What I'm talking about are ways of starting snowballs that are hard to overcome really early in a game.
Sure. Yeah. So something like a Johnny and Psychic Frog, obviously.
Yes. So this is started when I decided like I didn't want planeswalkers anymore in my cube because I found that the play pattern of a planeswalker invalidated a lot of the aggro decks because now they had to devote resources towards this planeswalker, and they just kind of created a snowball. And then I took that further, but the problem was that more and more of the good constructed cards being released were cheap snowball cards. Because you see stuff like, Inti, Preacher of the Schism, Sentinel of the Nameless City or whatever. Like, there's so many cards that cost 2 to 4 mana that just if you don't have a removal spell right away, they just kind of take over the game. So I'm not saying by all means, I know everybody's cube is unique. I actually, funnily enough, I don't like drafting vintage cube as much because, again, when I talk about what I enjoy about playing Magic, it's solving the puzzle, it's making relevant decisions, and are the decisions I make going to give me a chance at winning this game? And what chance do I have of winning the game if my opponent goes, turn one Black Lotus, or channels out a Emrakul or tinkers out a Colossus or whatever? Like, those are so many things that invalidate a game of Magic. So I've just kind of, again, designed my cube very back to basics. It's almost like playing a very advanced limited format. And
Like a
similar to
master set almost, right?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of the things you were talking about are things that I totally agree with. It's players should not be able to just draft 4 to 5 colors every time and just take the best card out of every pack. You should have different archetypes, and those probably should be tied to a color or a color pair. So I'm actually the type of person who, when I actually don't do any of the arena cubes anymore, partly because I don't like the snowball cards, but also because when I do play a format, I like getting really heavily invested into it.
Right.
So one of the things I like is when I go into the combat step, I then have a catalog of what are all the tricks my opponent can be representing and which ones am I choosing to play around and which ones am I going to blow out if they do this type of thing. And when you're playing a brand new set, nobody knows any of that kind of stuff. So that's why with the set reviews, I like to get started early. So I'm comfortable with the cards. I already have a leg up when the set started. And then throughout the entire duration of the format, I feel like I have that comfort level where I know what the gameplay and how the game's going to kind of progress from there. So even though I am very picky in the formats I do these days, this is a long-winded way of saying I am genuinely interested in trying out your cube one of these days, because it seems like you're kind of catering to the type of Magic I enjoy to play. And probably not for this podcast, but I would be interested in talking about some potential additions and cuts, both for my cube and potentially for yours as well.
Sure. Yeah. We'll get you in the Discord. You can join one of our drafts at night one time. Mark, to close us out, do you want to give any cool, old school tournament constructed anecdotes you have rolling around?
There's a lot of stories. One of the cool things about the old mantra was the old saying used to be play the game, see the world. So you'd travel all over the place, and there was tournaments in you'd have a lot of them in Asia and Japan, you'd have them in Central and South America, you'd have a bunch of them in Europe, and you'd get to actually travel and see a lot of the world and meet different people. I'm actually quite sad that all the Pro Tours these days seem to be the same 3 to 5 US cities over and over again. Because I would love to, even though I'm not the one participating anymore, I just think it's so good for the growth of the game to have not only the North American population forced to shift across the ocean and see different parts of the world, but also for that community to then come together and have all these big name pros visit and have the hype of all the convention stuff going on in the tournament. And on that note, so one of the probably interesting stories was when they replaced nationals. So funnily enough, in 2011, which is when I won nationals and then came top 16 at the PT at Worlds, that was the year that they then switched to the Planeswalker point system, which was a disaster. So they scrapped nationals and they scrapped Worlds, which is clear proof that, hey, if Marc's winning, the system's got to be not working because we got to change something. But what they replaced it with, they still had an international tournament, and they called it the World Magic Cup. And this went on for a few years. And so the World Magic Cup was a way to get people to play a ton of Magic. That was kind of their goal. And it was, you still had 4 slots for your country. One of them was for the person with the most pro points in the country. And then 3 of them were decided by basically 3 PTQs. They were called WMCQs. So they were World Magic Cup qualifiers. So open tournaments, you win a WMCQ, and you're qualified to represent your nation at the next World Magic Cup. Long-winded setup here. So Going into the last Pro Tour of the season, which was in Barcelona, this was going to be the end, and I was the runaway leader for Canada to be the points total leader and guarantee my slot, right? So
Sure.
I thought I was a shoe-in for actually playing in the first World Magic Cup. I was super excited about it. I honestly didn't take my Pro Tour Barcelona testing that seriously, and I toured a
Okay.
bunch with my fiance at the time. We had a fantastic trip, but they'd already held the first qualifier, so we knew who one member of the team was, and then the second member was going to be me. And then, sure enough, Pro Tour Barcelona 2012 was won by none other than Alexander Hayne, one of my testing partners, who was also
Uh-huh.
Canadian. And he got an unthinkable amount of pro points for winning the tournament and surpassed me. And all of a sudden, I was no longer qualified to play in the first World Magic Cup.
Oh no.
So I now had to play in basically these PTQs again to reclaim my spot. And so I said, okay, I've got one shot. A couple weeks later, Toronto tournament rolls around. I built a deck. I really liked it. I was pretty happy about it. I played really good Magic and actually lost in the semifinals to a fantastic local player. And then was kind of crushed because, again, I had come so close and
Yeah.
just missed out on the World Magic Cup team. And so the third slot to decide, or I should say the fourth slot to decide the last player on our team was going to be literally 7 days after that in Calgary, which is like a 4 hour flight from Toronto. Like it's pretty
Right.
far. And so I kind of, I wished the guy good luck who'd won, and we had a really strong team because he was really good. And obviously Alex Haynes is an incredible player, so things were really good. And then I posted about it on social media, and then people were like, well, wait, aren't you going to go like play in Calgary? Like you got to try and win your slot. And it became this crowdfunding thing where people were actually like, no, 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 we really need to have a good team. We want you to play on the team, Mark. And even the guy who beat me in Toronto, he chipped in for my flight to pay to, he's like, yeah, I still want you to be on the team. So I basically had my entire trip paid for to fly out to Calgary the next weekend and like give it one final chance. So obviously, you know where this story is going. Like I flew out there.
Yeah.
I had basically my entire trip paid for. Stayed with a bunch of friends. Played out of the friends that I was staying with. I was staying with three other people. I had to beat one of them in the quarters and one of them in the semis, which was like super awkward because like it's like, oh, thanks for having me. But I actually played the best Magic I've ever played at that tournament. Like it was the only time that the whole like matrix where you can see the code and everything's going. I could see like 4 turns in advance. It was such an incredible feeling. I wish I could capture that high again, but it
Yeah.
was an awesome time. And then got to play in the next World Magic Cup and had a great time.
That is amazing. What a crazy series of events. Well, Mark, I think that's going to close it out from here. If people, first of all, thank you for doing this with me. I had a lot of fun. I think other people are going to have fun as well. If people want to follow you on social media, where can they find you?
So I am at neo_MTG on Twitter, and then I think it's just neomtg with no spaces on Blue Sky. So I mean, as I said, I don't post a lot of personal information, but I do post a lot of limited decks on there. And then also, if people want to catch me, I saw that they recently announced a limited spotlight series in Toronto in first week of February, I believe it is.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So I am fully planning. My goals of going pro again are long gone, but I'm not going to pass up the opportunity to play in a sweet limited tournament in my backyard. So if anyone wants to come say hi to me then, please feel free to, and don't be shy.
Maybe I'll make the trip up. I'll think about that.
You 100% should. I'll make sure that we have something planned for the evening too. It'll be good.
That is very enticing. Well, Mark, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. You can find me on Blue Sky at sampratt.bskys.social. You can message me on Discord at samp6. Yeah, thanks for listening. Mark, anything else?
Just thanks for having me. For anyone who stuck around this length of time, I mean, this isn't your usual in-depth deep dive on one particular limited topic, but hopefully you enjoyed it. I'd be Curious to hear any feedback about it. And thanks again, Sam.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, y'all. See you next week.